So Paul, can you tell me what has actually happened to Wu Chi last week when he was at the border at Heathrow?
Yes, certainly. He was refused entry. He was coming as a visitor to see his wife and his adult son, who live in the UK. They're resident here. The normal thing that happens with visitors from Hong Kong is that they're allowed entry for 6 months, which is what happens for most visitors to the United Kingdom. But the Immigration Department have power to refuse to let a visitor come in if they think they're not going to leave at the end of their stay. And they have refused Wu Chi on the basis that they think he might not leave at the end of his stay. They've put it in writing. They've given him a formal notice of refusal. The reason why they say this appears to be that he talked very openly when questioned about the possibility that he might apply to stay here under the Hong Kong British National Overseas Scheme, which is a special scheme under the immigration rules that was introduced in the beginning of 2021. Now, he didn't say he was definitely going to do that, and he hasn't decided, but he talked about it, and because of that, it seems to be for that reason that the immigration officers at Heathrow refused him entry. This raises a lot of questions. It looks like a sort of double mistake because the fact that someone talks quite openly about something they might do, particularly someone of the standing of Mr. Wu, the former legislative councillor, former leader for several years of Hong Kong's largest political party, he is entitled to a certain amount of credibility. The second thing is that, and this is rather unusual, not widely appreciated, that what most visitors have to leave at the end of their stay, and you can't, while you're a visitor, say, oh, I'd like to stay here longer, I'd like to work, I'd like to be a student or whatever. You have to go back to your own country. But there is an exception for Hong Kong BNO passport holders. They are allowed to make an application to stay while visiting the UK. So if Mr. Wu were to decide to do that, he would not be breaking any rules. He would be doing something that the rules provide for. So it seems to be doubly wrong, and they haven't given any other reason for the refusal. So it appears to be both an error of judgment and an error of law, because Mr. Wu is absolutely entitled, should he choose to do so, to make that application. It doesn't necessarily mean the application will be granted, but he's entitled to make it. So that's why he was refused. Now, something that's caused a bit of confusion is he was then given what's called temporary admission, which is often done when people are refused, but for whatever reason, it's not appropriate to try and put them on the next aircraft leaving. It's sometimes called immigration bail. They're admitted usually for a few days, and that's what's happened. Mr. Wu's been admitted for 7 days. He's been told he has to report back on Wednesday, and on Wednesday he will be removed to Hong Kong. So he is actually here. He has actually seen his wife and his son after 5 years imprisonment. But at the moment, he has to leave on Wednesday unless something else happens.
So after you have sent the Home Secretary the letter, did you receive any reply?
Nothing yet. The letter went on Saturday, of course. a lot of officials won't be working at the weekend, although some may be. But I would hope to hear something in the course of today.
But has Wu's passport been confiscated?
Yes, it has.
So he doesn't have any passport with him. So he
He
can
has
only
no
get.
passport. So he can only leave on the flight that they want to put him on. He can't go to another country. He can't go to France or something like that.
Just to clarify that he presented the BNO passport when he was being questioned by the border officer.
Well, I haven't actually checked that with him. I would expect that he did, but I haven't actually checked. So it's possible he presented the SAR passport. I don't know.
Yeah, because most Hong Kongers have two passports with us.
Yes, I know. Yes. But I mean, which one he produced? He may have produced both of them. But that's a point I hadn't actually asked him, because I don't think anything is going to turn on which passport he produced.
Do you know whether any border officer or the immigration officer has mentioned anything relating to the so-called criminal record to him?
Well, I don't know if they said anything when they were questioning him, but it isn't anything about that in the letter of refusal. That raises some interesting issues, because normally people with a substantial criminal record cannot gain settlement under the BNO scheme. But obviously, prisoners of conscience like Mr. Wu are in a very special category. But that is something that would have to be considered by the Home Secretary if Mr. Wu made an application for settlement.
So when you are his representing Wu as the barrister, what's your next step? Has he given any instruction to you, or has you ever advised anything?
My advice to him is really confidential. I don't think he'd want me to be discussing that in public. I've discussed the options with him at some length. We've had a number of telephone and video conferences. And I just advise what he decides to do is a personal decision for him. And, I can't answer for him.
And there is some facts that I would like to clarify between the two reports, that is the Times as well as the AP. Because for the Times reports, it has written that Wu was hoping to use the BNO scheme to take up residence in the UK. While for AP, he said that he has already booked the return tickets in November, and then the return date has been changed by someone that he doesn't know. Could you please help to clarify actually what his plan was and is?
I'll tell you what I know, which is that he had indeed booked a return ticket for November. The AP interview is accurate. That is directly with Mr. Wu. The Times report, if it used the word hoping, that's not right. He was considering it, but had not taken a definite decision.
That's why he has not hinted that to the border officer.
Well, again, I haven't seen any record of any interview with the Border Force officer. I've simply seen the refusal letter. But what Mr. Wu tells me is that he made it clear all along, not just at the border, but previously when he visited the British consulate in Hong Kong before traveling to check his status and to check whether there might be any problems. He was told by the consulate, as I understand it, that there were no problems and that he was absolutely free to make a visit to the UK. And my understanding is that both at the consulate and at the border, he said he was considering the BNO scheme, but had not taken a decision whether to apply.
So if you have not received any reply, so what's the next step would be, or possibly be?
Well, there are a whole range of things that someone in this situation can do, but I'm talking here about theoretical possibilities, and I simply have no idea what Mr. Wu will choose to do. He could apply for judicial review of the Home Secretary's decision to refuse him entry. That, of course, is a very major thing. There's a filter, you have to get permission, and it's a very expensive process. But it is something that is done from time to time when people are refused entry. It is a route of challenging. Some people have wrongly reported that he'd applied for asylum. He hasn't. Now, whether that's an option, I don't know. But of course, asylum is treated quite differently, and an application for an asylum, a person will never be removed until that application has been fully dealt with. But at the moment, it's not a question about asylum. If there is absolutely no response from the Home Secretary, I imagine that Mr. Wu will be involving the most influential people that he can find to ask them to intercede on his behalf. So I think those are three possibilities. Another possibility is that he might ask if he can just leave voluntarily and leave. But, these are the possibilities I can see at this point, but what Mr. Wu will choose to do is entirely up to him, and I don't have any definite instructions on that.
So this may be the last question from my side, is as someone who really knows the system, and you have helped many Hong Kong people coming to the UK as well. As of this point, do you consider the current BNO policy can really provide adequate protection to the Hong Kong democracy activists or those former political prisoners from Hong Kong?
That is a really interesting question. Until now, there have not been, as far as I'm aware, people coming through who had served long prison sentences based on trials that have been condemned as unfair. So, and the scheme as introduced excludes people who've served sentences of imprisonment. Now, something's wrong there, because if one takes Mr. Wu's conviction, for example, he was one of the Democratic 45 who were all convicted of subversion, which is an offence that doesn't exist in English law, and convicted on a basis which a person as distinguished as the English Supreme Court Judge Lord Sumption said was clearly wrong. And Lord Sumption was on the Hong Kong Court of Final Appeal, and he resigned in protest at the conviction in Wu Chi-Wai's case and the cases of the 44 others. Now, there's something very wrong with the system. If it protects people who are in danger because of their political views, but who haven't actually served a sentence of imprisonment, but the people who have been imprisoned on a basis that doesn't exist under our law, and who are widely recognized as prisoners of conscience, something's just wrong if the system excludes them. Now, the Home Secretary always has power to admit people outside the immigration rules. This is in exceptional circumstances, but it's not extremely rare. It happens from time to time that you get people whose case is very unusual, it doesn't quite fit the rules, but they are clearly deserving people who ought to be assisted. Now, if for whatever reason the Home Secretary concluded that if Mr. Wu made an application, the Home Secretary concluded he wasn't within the rules, the Home Secretary does have the option, in an appropriate case, of admitting outside the rules. I would expect either an amendment to the rules to cover the situation of the Democratic 45, or I would expect them to be admitted outside the rules. There has to be some change from the system as it's set out at the moment. I'd like to emphasize that Mr. Wu is a very deserving person. He led the Democratic Party, the Hong Kong Democratic Party, founded by Martin Lee. Throughout its existence, it has stood for freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law in Hong Kong. You could say that it's a party that very much reflects British values. Mr. Wu has led that party. He's been a legislative councillor because he and others were held a democratic primary to try and make sure that there were a limited number of pro-democracy candidates in the 2020 Legislative Council elections in Hong Kong to maximize the number who got elected so they wouldn't split their own vote. And because some people associated with that primary wanted to use a majority to vote down the budget to get concessions from the chief executive, which is the sort of thing that in a democratic country is normal politics. The US Congress is holding up the budget all the time to get this or that in return. Because he had that conviction, he has spent well over 4 years in prison. This is an extremely harsh sentence for doing something which in England would be totally normal. And he is someone who we really ought to welcome in this country as a brave and distinguished person. And it is tragic that he has had this treatment at Heathrow.
Have you included this into your letter to the Home Secretary? This is a very good conclusion or description to what Wu has done and contributed.
Yes, I have. Not exactly the same words, but I've made the point that he's a brave and distinguished man.
Yeah. So, Paul, could you please let me know once you have received any feedback from the Home Secretary or from anyone from Home Office to your letter so that we can follow up and update that?
Yes, I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.